target date when there may be a result? You say you're looking at it now. Do we know when there may be some answers?
Well, there are some answers. So from the report that we put out in 2008, what we could see is that children who were coming into the system were more likely to have a community diagnosis. So their community physicians are more likely to be aware of autism and coming into the system. And that's changed over the 10 years that we've been monitoring.
But I understand that there are differences. I'm trying to figure out, have you validated that that's what's going on, whether there's a 1 in 47 rate in Utah? I'm just trying to figure out why the number is different in my state.
One other example is that we are actually doing, we're not doing, Autism Speaks is funding a special study in South Carolina. So using one of the ATOM sites, they're looking at it in a much more in-depth way to see, in fact, is that number in South Carolina low? So again, it's a puzzle, and we're putting all the pieces of the puzzle together that way.
Yeah, look, I'm not a statistician. I just see a big difference in numbers. So I think it would be helpful if we could understand why that number is different. In my limited time, I'd like to ask one other question. Can any of you tell me about any new therapy approaches that are emerging for effectiveness in treating autism?
There's certainly some therapies in terms of behavioral interventions and other kinds of things that are emerging, that are being developed. In terms of something like a medical therapy, I think we're much farther away from those kinds of interventions, though one would hope that eventually we would have those to offer as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Would the gentleman yield his remaining time to Mr. Burton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question. Why did the FDA and HHS take thimerosal out of all the children's vaccines except just the one or two or three? I mean, I'd just like to know why they took the thimerosal out if there was no problem and leave it in just a couple.
I think neither of us are vaccine experts, and we'd be happy to look into that and provide additional information.
Well, I'd like to have an answer, because I think most people would really like to know. Thank you.
I thank both of you. I thank you for agreeing to answer that for the record. And by unanimous consent, I allow Mr. Posey to ask one additional question to this panel, then we're going to go to the large second panel.
It's to you, Mr. Chairman. In the course of answering this, one of the witnesses told me that the fugitive doctor had been involved in a couple studies with CDC, and I have information here that he was involved in 21 of the 24 studies, and I would like to submit that to the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Again, I'd like to thank our distinguished first panel. Again, we will accept additional information for the record. If I know you've been in front for a long time, I might suggest that you take advantage of our conference room in the back and leave when you choose to, but if you can stay for a while and watch it on the monitor, it may help you in additional items for the record. So with that, we're going to suspend. We're not going to leave the room, and if the clerk would please change over for the next panel so we can get started immediately.
Oh, thank you.
Jake, hi.
Did you go up and like talk to the or is that like is there like
No, we're staying close to our seats. because we're going to
Totally. I just wanted to, I got the drift.
This hearing on rising autism rates will continue. The committee hearing from a range of advocacy groups next. Bob Wright, the co-founder of Autism Speaks. They'll also hear from Scott Badish, the president of the Autism Society. Also, Safe Minds board member Mark Blacksell. And there's also the coordinator of the Asperger Initiative, Bradley McGarry. So we're waiting for this hearing to get started again.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we really did not recess. So if our witnesses would now take their assigned seats, I suspect the second panel will take a very long time but be equally interesting.
While we wait for the panelists to be seated, look ahead to tomorrow morning on our Washington Journal program. Our guests are congressional historian Norm Ornstein, who'll talk about the proposed changes to filibuster rules in Congress. And later we'll hear from Politico Stephen Sloan, a tax reporter who'll discuss tax credits slated to expire at the end of the year as part of the so-called fiscal cliff. That's on C-SPAN every day starting at 7 a.m. Eastern.
Starting with Mr.